I'm the gender hipster, committed to exploring all the possibilities of all manners of gender fuckery, no matter where they arise. Say, we haven't talked about cross-dressing for a while, have we? Now hold on. I have realised that the vast majority of the movies I have to choose from are contrived cross-dressing comedies featuring a never-ending parade of heterosexual ninnies squeezing their way into dresses so that they don't lose the curling tournament. But why is the cross-dressing comedy the most commonly seen form of gender transgression? Well, to think about that, we must first consider the nature of cross-dressing itself.
Cross-dressing, more specifically men dressed in stereotypically feminine clothing, is understood in one of two ways. Throughout history, barring one or two matriarchal societies, women have been commonly seen as second-class citizens, meaning that everything associated with women is considered lesser. For a man to dress in women's clothing, he is degrading himself, associating himself with an inferior form of humanity. A woman dressing in male clothing gains power and respect and agency, because by wearing the clothes of men, she is able to assume their position of power. On the other hand, for a man to dress as a woman, he loses this power. Men dressing as women are considered funny in the same way that men engaging in slapstick are considered funny. They become fools. For cross-dressing to be viewed as comedic, we can't be given any indication that this is something the man truly wants to do. Hence why cross-dressing comedies always have a contrived and stupid reason for why the man has to dress in drag and pass as a woman.
After all, who'd want to become a gross, inferior woman thing, and lower themselves to be considered sexual objects with no agency or rights? No, any man who wants this kind of treatment must be a perverted, diseased individual with something wrong with his brain.
Which brings us to our second form of cross-dressing, the deviant cross-dresser.
If a man isn't cross-dressing against his will, he's cross-dressing to deceive other men and prey upon them.
Historically, men who cross-dress by choice have been portrayed either as predatory homosexuals or full-on killers.
Thankfully, this trend is beginning to wane, although there's still an assumption that any man who dresses in drag of his own volition must be doing so to attract a man. Because why else would you want to degrade yourself into being like a woman?
However, this isn't the only kind of cross-dressing there is. Nor is this, although that's certainly one of the most well-known acceptable forms. In reality, the majority of people who cross-dress fall into a different category altogether. Cisgender men, usually heterosexual, who like wearing women's clothing. But for some strange reason, they're nearly entirely absent from cinema.
There are barely any films about heterosexual, non-contrived cross-dressers, and one of the only films exploring this subject is often considered to be the worst movie of all time. Fuck no. Thankfully, I'm not going to be subjecting you, or indeed myself, to Glen or Glenda again. No, today I have an actual film, made by people who at least half knew what they were doing. This is 1992's Just Like a Woman.
The film details the life of Gerald, a man firmly in the ranks of 1980s big business, with all the glorious synth music and corner offices and rolled-up sleeves that entails. However, behind every 80s businessman lurks great darkness.
Yes, that's right. Gerald is a cross-dresser!
He has a nasty shock one day when his wife comes home early from an overseas trip and discovers his collection of clothing. Unfortunately, she doesn't know about Gerald's sartorial habits and immediately assumes that the random bras and stockings lying around are proof that he's having an affair.
Just give me a chance. Whoever she is, she's got terrible taste.
Thrown out of his house, Gerald has to find another place to live and moves into the house of Monica, a gently middle-aged woman running a boarding house, as if this were 1890 instead of 1980. Monica and Gerald are attracted to each other, but Gerald agonizes about his secret life, and how to tell Monica about it.
Well, it could be worse. It could be about a different sort of secret life entirely.
He's not boiling anyone's head and then arguing with neighbours about the resulting smell. In any case, Gerald finally plucks up the courage to tell Monica about his taste in outfits.
Needless to say, her initial reaction isn't entirely without surprise.
Gerald, I know what you're going to say. It's okay. Really.
I'm a transvestite.
I'm sorry, Gerald. It's just the thought of you.
first person I've ever told.
However, Monica comes around to the idea eventually, and Gerald begins to be braver about revealing his feminine side to the world, taking Monica to meet some of his fellow crossdressers, going shopping with her, and randomly standing around in the kitchen cooking a slap-up meal in his underwear because, you know, that's practical.
Well, now I know where Walter White got the idea.
Sadly, while Monica might be just fine with his fabulous outfits, the rest of the world still sucks, and Gerald is pulled over by the police for speeding, and while he tries to figure out how to deal with the fact that his appearance doesn't match his documentation, the police decide it'd be a great idea to assault him.
Because, you know, when you pull someone over for speeding, the most important thing to know is whether they have a penis or not.
After the news of Gerald's arrest gets back to his fossilized bigot of a boss, Gerald is unceremoniously dismissed, without even a weak parade of euphemistic speech explaining why he's been let go.
Security, Millichamp. Get up to Tilson's office now. He's to take nothing with him. Got not a single sheet of paper. And get his pass card. And his bloody car keys.
Well, a man who describes Asian people as yellow is hardly going to be particularly kind to people who don't conform to his narrow sphere of dickishness.
Our little yellow friends are prepared to spend $500 million. And they're asking us where to spend it, yes?
Gerald doesn't react well to his dismissal, going into a kind of exile as the company continues to battle at full tilt towards its 80s investor merger giant watch and shoulder pads business deal.
But oh no, the whole business deal is going to collapse because the boss is a giant racist.
I suppose it's not up to us to stop the yellow peril taking over the whole bloody world. Ah, in there, you'll find a list of French and German companies. Thrusty, sexy little companies. Exactly the sort the Japs are after.
Thankfully, Gerald's colleague CJ reveals that he needs Gerald's help, also dropping some pretty substantial hints that he knew about Gerald's female alter ego all along and didn't care.
God, I don't know whether I should tell you this.
What do you mean about the transvestite thing?
What do you mean you know about it?
Oh, hell, I know about that for years, yeah.
You haven't.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine goes to that club of his, what's it called? The Pembroke.
Does Gerald know you know?
Well, I never thought it was any of my business.
And so, at the 11th hour, Geraldine bursts into the meeting, and the film suddenly morphs into a bad cross-dressing comedy, much to the horror of her racist boss. After a few faltering starts, Geraldine suddenly becomes awesome, and saves the day with her magical business powers. Everybody wins! Quick, let's celebrate with the Palace of Versailles Orientalist drag ball. The film then ends with an absolutely amazing transition, and a fact trumpeting the astounding prevalence of cross-dressing.
Well, there's no one else here, so it must be me. Astonishing revelations about my true nature aside, how does this film portray gender hipsters?
Just Like a Woman is definitely a commendable effort, exceptional mostly because of its subject matter.
It's strange to think that heterosexual crossdressers are so incredibly rare on screen, confined to one-off jokes about weird sex lives, and never really explored with any degree of understanding.
Granted, there's an argument to be made that heterosexual crossdressers are the most invisible subset of the trans with an asterisk community, and therefore they have the easiest, smoothest time of having a gender expression outside of the norm. Since cross-dressing alone has nothing to do with gender identity or physical difference, it doesn't necessitate the agony of bathroom legislation, legal paperwork, or surgery. But here we have to think about the LGBT community as a whole. While there are definitely people who are treated far more cruelly by the world at large, this doesn't automatically erase the discrimination that heterosexual crossdressers face. Discrimination isn't a competition, and heterosexual crossdressers are one of the few groups of heterosexual men to receive practically no representation. And so, this movie gets many points for exploring what it means for Gerald to be a crossdresser, and how this is something intrinsic to his nature that shouldn't be a concern for others. We are shown many different reactions to Gerald's identity, from misunderstanding to discrimination to acceptance. There are several scenes in the movie in which people explain their understanding of cross-dressing, some of which are awkward and clunky, but definitely well-intentioned.
He's a perfectly heterosexual man who just happens to like dressing up in frocks. But the amazing thing is that it hasn't changed the way I feel about him at all. Yeah, I read somewhere that a man dressing as a woman in Japan is quite accepted.
It's not seen perhaps as posing the same sort of social or moral threat as in Western cultures.
However, the business meeting at the end is screamingly unlikely, and temporarily turns the whole film into a contrived cross-dressing comedy, complete with bizarre transitions and wacky music. But on the whole, even the shard of final stupidity is forgivable, especially when compared to how terrible most movies of this era were when dealing with the subject of trans with an asterisk people.
Because before she came to our little clinic, she was Milton Moorhead of Syosset, Long Island. Hello. No!
It isn't as if Gerald himself ever becomes a figure of fun, and the film doesn't end with him being cured. Instead, the people around him learn to accept him, and Gerald is able to fully accept himself.
So, should you watch it?
This film is glorious. It may have been made in the early 90s, but it's so beautifully, triumphantly rooted in the 80s. So much so that the final scene ends up looking like one of those amazingly horrific Microsoft Windows ads.
Now, it seems Koenig Auto has been quietly diversifying into some less conventional areas, such as illegal arms deals.
I'm using Windows 386. So all my applications are running at once.
The music is incredible, being so face-punchingly Wall Street in the 80s that the viewer instantly transforms into Michael Douglas with a side ponytail upon listening. If it weren't for these very dated elements, the film might have been dry or hand-wringingly dull, like Making Love, the most excruciatingly boring movie about gay acceptance that I've ever seen. But as it stands, this unintentional datedness elevates the film above being a simple tale of understanding, and into something else entirely.
It's important to note that this film is based on a book written by the real-life Monica, meaning that the perspective of the film is slightly skewed to that of Monica's character.
Apparently the book isn't particularly good, at least according to the one person on Goodreads who reviewed it.
But I'm sure it struck a chord with a good deal of real-life cross-dressers and their partners. And really, there aren't that many films about this, even now. So, embrace your inner Gordon Gekko, cook yourself some popcorn in your undies, and then give it a watch. You'll thank me.
That was a terrible idea!